Well, good morning or afternoon or evening or wherever you are. My name is Frank Austin, and I'm alcoholic. Thanks for having me, Glenn. Thanks for having me. I'm from beautiful Conway, by God, Arkansas, right down here. We're 30 miles north of Little Rock, northwest of Little Rock on I-40. Been here about 4 years. Glad to be here. I have a sponsor. I have a sobriety date. My sobriety date is July 24th of 1976, which means that I just celebrated my 46th anniversary in Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah, that's a pretty good deal. It's hard to do when you're 44 years old, but good to see Glenn again. Used to see Glenn quite often on the Big Island over there. I was talking to some of the folks. They had me Tom up in Seattle, so they're going to start to bash up again this next year in April. So that'd be good. I have a sponsor. My sponsor is a guy named Tom Hicken. And I see there's an Akron Morning Unity Daily 9 a.m. Eastern Time poster here that Nate has up. My sponsor lives in Akron, Ohio, of all places. And my sponsor has 53 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. He has 4 brothers that are all sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're extremely active in AA. They spend a lot of time at Intergroup and Dr. Bob's house. They're always in service. I'm fortunate to have my sponsor for a couple of reasons. One, he's a good sober member in good standing of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a principled man. He's a man in service in Alcoholics Anonymous all the time. He's never, and I appreciated your reading this morning from the daily reflections. He's constantly in service, and that's the way I learned Alcoholics Anonymous, is to be of service. The other benefit that I have by having Tom be my sponsor is not only does he live in Akron, Ohio, we all know what Akron means to us, but Tom is a devout Catholic man, and Tom goes to church almost every day, which is a great benefit for me. Not only is he a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but he participates in a spiritual life. He participates in a spiritual life. Each day, he tries to attend a brief or spend a brief part of his morning in church, praying, and quite often you'll find Tom with a list in his hand, and the list in his hand has my name on it. And so I have a sponsor that goes to church almost every day and prays for me. What a gift that is, huh? Imagine that, somebody praying for you every day. What a blessing that is for us. My last sponsor was a guy named Sandy Beach. Sandy was my sponsor for 9 years before he passed, and that was a true blessing. Helped me through a lot of stuff. And some of you are probably familiar with Sandy. I'm a product of a wonderful, blessed fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got here when I was 29 years old. I was fortunate. I was 29. I was 9 years out of the jungles of Vietnam. I'm a Vietnam Marine. I spent 13 months in Vietnam, and I did Marine Corps stuff in Vietnam. I drank a lot in Vietnam, and I did a lot of Marine Corps stuff in Vietnam. And I don't need to belabor that point, but you get the idea. I was pretty disturbed cat when I got here, and I was blessed to find the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not an expert on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just a guy that got to get sober when he was 29 and got blessed because of when I entered the program, just a quick story. I grew up in San Jose. Both my parents are dead as a direct result of the disease of alcoholism, or physical manifestations thereof. And I got to watch that when I was growing up. So if you're a product of an alcoholic home, the great benefit that I have is that I have the ability through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to do an inventory that relieves me of the bondage of me. It relieves me of the bondage of my thoughts and my actions. Grew up in this alcoholic home. I had 3 lives. I didn't want you to know where I lived, because where I lived was an alcoholic home. There was cigarette burns in the sofas, and my mother tried her best. She had 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 at the utmost of those pennies or Woolworths $4.99 dresses, and she smoked Chesterfield cigarettes and drank Thunderbird wine, and she did the very best she could. She did the very best she could with her alcoholism. Man, that poor woman just suffered terribly with her alcoholism. But we were poor, and whatever extra money she had, between she and my father, they spent it on a lot of alcohol. My father drank Paisano wine. They both died at a relatively young age, and I had resentments that I didn't know were resentments. And when I was a football player, and I had this life that I didn't want you to know that I lived, and I started drinking then. My drinking started then. My drinking started right around high school, 15 or 16. Graduated from high school, and about 18, 20 months later, I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I went off to 9 short months later. I'm in Vietnam, and things happen real fast. I'm drinking every day, and every day that I get the chance, I'm drinking in Vietnam. And the United States Marine Corps is not responsible for my alcoholism. I'm a believer in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that I am bodily and mentally different from my fellows. I have the disease of alcoholism, but it didn't look like the disease of alcoholism. I'm bodily and mentally different from my fellows. I suffer from a disease of a threefold nature. I am physically unable to consume alcohol without having the disease of more come by. I can't put anything in my body related to alcohol that doesn't tell me I want more. So I have the physical allergy. What I didn't know was that I had a mental illness with respect to my alcoholism. I was mentally ill. And the last thing I had that I didn't know that I suffered from was a grave spiritual malady. And I suffered from it, but I didn't know how to overcome it. So I continued to drink, and came home from Vietnam and created a lot of havoc and hurt a lot of people. And I'm carrying a loaded .45 semi-automatic pistol, and I'm out of the disco era. So at one time I had awesome hair, and I had an orange leisure suit. I had some polyester clothes, and man, I could bust a move. I could lay down some disco, and but polyester, they should have put on a when if you wore polyester and you're kind of an old folk like we are, I should have put a warning on there: do not smoke when you're wearing polyester clothing. You can't do that. And you can't smoke and drink and wear polyester clothes. It's just a mess. So I had my leisure suit was burnt orange, and I've become a drinker, and I can't quit drinking, and I'm causing problems. But it wasn't all bad. I mean, we had for those of you that are around our age, maybe some of you had grandparents or parents that had avocado appliances, or you had shag carpeting, and you don't want to throw up in that shag carpeting, because you get that shag carpet rake, and man, it's a mess. But I come home from overseas, and I'm drinking, but at the end I'm drinking to cover up my drinking, and I don't want to drink, but I cannot not drink. And people keep asking me, what's the matter with you? what's the matter with you, man? And now I'm starting to not come home, and now I'm starting to throw up blood. Now my life is turning into a mess, and I'm on my way home one night from a drunk, and I run into a family, and I put two kids in the hospital, and I could have told you, if you would have asked me at 7 o'clock that morning, is your alcoholism going to cause you to drive drunk and put two kids in the hospital with minor injuries? I would have told you absolutely not. But I'm the kind of alcoholic that I can't differentiate between the true and the false. I can't tell you what's real anymore at the end of my drinking. And finally, the last night I'm drinking, I'm drinking in Compton, California. Beautiful spot, Compton. And I'm carrying this loaded .45 automatic pistol in the back of my belt, and I'm on my way to Las Vegas, I think, to break the bank. I had a couple $100, a Datsun B210, and a case of beer and a quart of whiskey, and I'm on my way. And four angels showed up. I got about halfway out of Compton, and some highway patrolmen pulled me over, but they didn't look like angels. I've had angels in my life, my entire life. I just couldn't see them. My selfish, self-centered mind blocked me off from seeing anything. My fear and my anger and my self-appraisal, it blocked me from everything. And when they arrested me, I'd been drinking in Compton, so I'm straight out of Compton, and I cannot not drink, and I cannot not hurt people, and I don't want to hurt you, but if you're around me and I'm drinking, something bad's going to happen. So these guys pull me over, and I get out of the car, and a couple of minutes later we have this discussion, and there's four of them now, because they see I'm not too stable, and they pull their guns out, and that's how I get to Alcoholics Anonymous. Four highway patrolmen draw their weapons on the side of the freeway and put me in handcuffs and stuff me in the back of a highway patrol car. But you couldn't have told me that night that that's what was going to happen, that was going to be the very end of my drinking, that I would have some kind of picture. About an hour later, I'm in the LA County Jail, and this is important, and I don't want to belabor the point. I'm in the LA County Jail. One more time, I'm arrested, and I can't figure out why. I said I wasn't going to do this. I promised I wasn't going to do this. I told everybody I'm not going to do this. I told them I'm not going to drink again. I promise I won't drink again, but I drink again no matter what. And this guy's laying there on the bench, and this guy's laying on this bench, and his arms are real skinny, and he's yellow. He's got cirrhosis of the liver, and his nose is real bulbous, and it's red. And his stomach is distended, and he's dying of alcoholism, and I know what that looks like because I saw my father like that in the LA Harbor General Hospital, and this guy says to me, "What are you in here for, kid?" And I told him, and he said, "Don't worry about that stuff." He said, "Look at me, I've been in here 16 or 17 times." And I looked at that guy, and for just a moment in time, I said something like this: if something doesn't happen pretty quick, that's going to be me. I know who that guy is. He looks just like my father when he was laying in the bed in the hospital. So I know what alcoholism looks like now. I got a better picture. A couple of weeks later, I'm in court in Compton, of course, and a judge sends me to the Monday Night Big Book group of Bellflower, California. And I walked in the door, and I had a man that saved my life. And his name was Bill Honeycutt. And he was from Arkansas. But he had a nickname. Everybody from Arkansas has got nicknames. Or back then, everybody had nicknames. You got Bicycle Bob, Sweet Sue, Pickle Pete, Mexican Joe. But his nickname was an Arkansas nickname. It was Booger Red. And he's about 5'7", and he wore a fedora hat, and he carried a cane. And he saved my life, and he was an angel, but he didn't look like an angel. But he stood by the door. And he stood by the door just like the poem that that Shoemaker wrote, and I won't bore you with all that. I'll just read a paragraph. Shoemaker wrote this poem, and it says, I stand by the door. I neither go too far in nor stay too far out. The most important door to the world is the door through which men walk and they find God. There's no use in my going way inside and staying there when so many are still sick and they're outside and they can't, and they, as much as I, crave to know where the door is. And they may never find it. It's only the wall where the door ought to be, by creeping along the wall like blind men with outstretched hands, groping hands, feeling for the door, knowing the door must be there, yet they still never find it. So I stand by the door. That's what happened to me. Bill Honeycutt was standing by the door. So when I walked in all my madness, he did something real simple. He stuck out his hand. He said, welcome, kid. I'm glad you're here. Gonna get you a cup of coffee. This is where the literature is. And I knew there was something special about Bill. You could see that his lights were on, that something had changed, but I didn't know it was through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that he was willing to give of himself so that others could live like we're supposed to do. But he did it. He gave me a God rock, and I said, well, Bill, why do I need this rock? And he said, Frank, when trouble comes, and it surely will, you're going to need to rub this rock so God can hear. So put it in your pocket, son. You're going to need it. And then he got me involved in service in Alcoholics Anonymous. He made me the chairperson. That's the guy that picks up the chairs and puts them away, right? And sometimes you're the mop guy. That's the guy that mops the floor after the meeting. And then they got me a job as the assistant coffee maker at the Lakewood speakers meeting. And there's a problem in this meeting because the coffee makers, me, the assistant coffee maker, they promoted me to assistant coffee maker, right? They wouldn't let me be the full-time coffee maker. They gave me the assistant coffee maker job. So they have a group conscience one night, and the group conscience is that the assistant coffee maker does not need to be armed. So Bill says, Frankie says, I got a problem here. He says, you got to take that 45 caliber pistol you got and put it in the car, son, because nobody's going to steal the coffee. The ashtrays are going to be just fine. The coffee cups are going to be there. You can wash all you want when they're over. But I'm afraid of who's going to come in the door. I'm afraid. I'm still a little jumpy. I'm still about 9-10 years out of NAM, and things aren't right with me upstairs. And sometimes they still aren't. But Bill taught me about love. He taught me about service. He taught me about giving of myself so that someone could live. And I thought, man, what a gift this guy must have. But he demonstrated in the manner in which he lived the characteristics that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous that were later going to save my life. But I didn't know that. So we drove thousands of miles, and about 18 months, I'm this assistant coffee maker in this meeting. 18 months into my sobriety, my kid goes into a coma. He's in Children's Hospital. And I'd taken some steps. I'd done some step work by that time. But I'm in Children's Hospital. My son's in a coma. And he got bit by a mosquito. He had viral encephalitis. And he's in a coma in a bed in Children's Hospital. And I'm sleeping in a chair. His mother and I were sleeping in a chair. And I reached in my pocket and I grabbed this rock so God could hear. I said, God, I don't know what to do. I'm lost, dear God, and I don't want to drink. Will you please help me? Because Bill kept it real simple. He said, sometimes, Frank, the best thing you can do is stick your head a little farther down in that pillow and just say, dear God, please help me. Because I don't know what to do. I'm stuck, God. And it was quiet, and I had my big book. And couple hours later, you people knew what to do. You turned off your TV and you got in your car. 5 or 6 of you drove 40 miles to Children's Hospital in Orange County. And you opened the big book with me and you sat in the parents' lounge while my son was in a coma 5 or 6 doors down. And you read the big book to me. You gave of yourself so that I could live. Not the rest of my life, but just right then. And Bill said, you know, son, he said, drinking's not going to make things any better here. You have to ask for the right thought or direction. You have to follow the information that's in the book. Mm. And that boy woke up. He had a trach they put a trach in his throat and he was paralyzed. And for the next 3 years, we didn't drink and we went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and we were in service as best we could. We took the steps and we were able to be a good parent. We were able, not like before, we were able to bring home groceries. We could put food in the cupboard. We could put Levi. We could put clothes on our kid. We could pay doctor bills. We could, one day at a time, one moment at a time, I got to be a good father. He'd put his finger over his throat when he talked. And sometimes all I get is right now. Sometimes all I get is right here, right now. That's all any of us get, isn't it? Right here, right now. What a blessing we have for that. He had 22 major surgeries and he died twice on the operating table and they brought him back to life. But because of Alcoholics Anonymous, we had a little fire engine we pushed around in the front of the house and we got to teach him with God's help and you people and Bill Honeycutt and members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was able to walk again and talk again. What a wonderful blessing we have as a result of the big book and people that love us in Alcoholics Anonymous, don't we? Several years later, his brother was born with a birth defect called biliary atresia. Can be related to Agent Orange. My second son lived to be 23 and a half months old, and he passed away. Quick story about Children's Hospital. I'm in Children's Hospital one night and I can't sleep. And you walk the halls, and I'm walking down the hall, and I come upon this little kid, and he's got this tower, and he's got this chemo medicine, and we just exchanged pleasantries, and he and I sat down in the hall, sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, just a father, just sat down in the hall, and he said something like this. He says, he says, I've got cancer. You know that? I said, no, I didn't know that. He says, yeah. I said, well, tell me about that. Tell me about your hopes and dreams, son. What's going on? He said, we said, well, I'm 9, I said, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, I'm 9. I said, well, what do you hope? He said, I hope I can get rid of this cancer so that when I can get to 10. I said, well, why 10? He said, well, when you're 10 and when you live where I live, you can play Little League Baseball. I thought, you old fool. You almost missed it all. So I went back to my room and I prayed for that kid. See, these angels come by, and I only get to see them for a minute. They just wander through life, and sometimes I can help them, and sometimes they can help me. But if I'm asleep, I can't do that. Sandy used to talk about seeing how spiritually awake you can be through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the end result. That's kind of trying to where we're going, is to have a spiritual awakening sufficient enough so that I might be able to help somebody else carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, wow. Anyway, I love the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love the 12 and 12. I really appreciate my sponsor. That boy's mother and I didn't make it for several reasons. I've never not gone to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never not been in service in Alcoholics Anonymous. moved to Northern California, and where my second son passed away. And then we moved again, and I took a service position in Folsom Prison, doing a big book study in Folsom Prison. We've done big book studies in San Quentin, and we've done big book studies in Folsom, and we've done big book studies and opened the big book and step studies in Chino and CRC, and I'm better at Skid Row than I am anywhere else. I'm a better guy at Volunteers of America, where they bring them in a paddy wagon and they wash them down with a hose, and they're dying of alcoholism, and there's no hope. And maybe, just maybe, there's a guy standing by the door that sticks out his hand and says, "Welcome, I'm glad you're here, kid. This is our big book. These are the 12 steps. This is how we find the way out." So I married a girl about 20 years ago. She's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have a wonderful life. I used to go to the Big Island Bash quite often, where I would see Glenn, and we'd see Walter and Toma, all those guys. What a Mama Kai, and here I've had spiritual experiences all over the world. Toma took me up on the top of the mountain between the two volcanoes, and he taught me about the Hawaiian way. He taught me how they believe in their God and their spirit world. I've been in Australia, and I've talked to Aborigines, and they speak about their spiritual life, because I'm a spiritual child. There's so much I don't know about God and about what He wants, but I ask each and every day. So I finished a physical one day about 4 years ago, and I'm sitting in a restaurant. My telephone rings, and it's my daughter-in-law. And she says, "Frank, your oldest son, Gordon, just died this morning. He's 42 years old, and he passed away." That's the kid that was in the chair. That's the kid that was in the hospital. That's the kid that was paralyzed. That's the kid that couldn't walk. That's the kid that couldn't make it. I'm sitting in this restaurant, and I'm looking at my wife, the girl I married here about 20 years ago, and I said, "I don't know what to do." So we prayed in this restaurant. When in doubt, ask for the right thought or direction. Saying many times each day. And quite often I still have to do that. So, but that night, after I got the message, I went home and I decided not to fly to Denver. And I called my sponsor, and within a matter of 4 hours, there was 7 guys in my living room, because they didn't want me to be alone. They knew what it meant to be of service to one another. And that's the kind of Alcoholics Anonymous I live in. I hope that you find an Alcoholics Anonymous like that. My wife and I are very active. I went to Wyoming, and I was able to take care of the services. I had enough money I could pay for everything that they were kind of broke, and I was able to. But I was able to not drink. But here's what happened: I'm on my way to Wyoming. When I get there, one of my sponsees drove 800 miles. He drove 800 miles so I wouldn't have to be alone. That's service in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what a guy like me gets. A wonderful life I have. I have to accept things I can't change. I'm 3 weeks before that. We spoke at Founders Day. I kind of a mumble jumbled mess most of the time, but we were speaking at Founders Day in Akron, and they were kind enough to ask me to come. So I spoke at one of their Saturday meetings. It's really cool to speak at Founders. It's really cool to go. It's very cool to speak there. Very cool to just be a part of that. So my wife spoke on a Thursday night. It was her birthday, and we were sitting in a restaurant. I don't know if you ever heard Deb H., but we're talking to Deb, and Deb says about her husband that had passed. He was a Marine, and he was killed in a head-on car wreck. And she said, Frank, I was talking to this master gunnery sergeant, this sober guy out of Texas, senior top sergeant in the Marine Corps. And when you're in the Marine Corps family, it's kind of a little special kind of hookup deal. And he called me and he said, Deb, I need to talk to you. And she said, why is that? He said, well, I need to tell you something. She said, I'm really mad at God for taking my husband. He said, Deb, that's what I need to talk to you about. She said, oh, go ahead. What is it? He said, there's something I need to tell you. He said, God does not take people. God receives them. Almost missed it. Almost missed it. It wasn't but 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm sitting in that restaurant and I get that phone call. And now the whole world looks different, right? You know, by this time, I've read a lot of Ram Dass. I've led the letter to Rachel's parents. I believe a lot of what that guy's putting down is correct, and I'm just thankful that I heard that, because I know now that God did not take my son. God received my son, and it's a whole different dynamic then. See. So I come home and my wife's in as big a service as I am. We were doing service work in the Sacramento County Jail for a number of years, and she was the woman's female coordinator. And so we were praying. We have a grandchild that lives here, and some children that just graduated from UCA here in Conway, Arkansas, University of Central Arkansas. And we found a wonderful group of Alcoholics Anonymous here in Conway, Arkansas. The first thing we did was get hooked up with the group of alcoholics in Arkansas. But we're sitting around, we're praying before we come here, and when we find out that there's no meeting, there's no female meeting in the jail in the county we live in, and one of my sponsees, one of the guys that I met here, just happens to be good friends with the sheriff. So we go to the jail and we're talking to the sheriff, and we said, is there any way that we could bring an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting into the female side of your jail? And he said, where you guys been? We've been waiting for you for 25 years. We've been asking. So before COVID started, my wife she had 20 women. They set up a schedule, and there was one meeting a week in the Faulkner County Jail with big books and literature, things like that. I've traveled around the world. I've had spiritual experiences just like that. I had one in the south of France. I'm blessed to have been there. We got to speak in London. We had an opportunity to talk in Glasgow, Scotland. Wonderful people. I'm in the Compostela de Saint Jacques. We just left a 12 and 12 study. Compostela de Saint Jacques is a walkway that you walk. It's the path of St. James. And I'm entering this 600-year-old chateau, and a cold wind blows through me. And I hear this voice, and you may think I'm crazy, and that's okay. But this voice says, where you been? We've missed you. Where you been? And perhaps I am crazy, but I'm an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I take the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And now, maybe I am crazy, but I see things that I couldn't see before. I'm no longer blind to those things for which I couldn't see. I hear things that I couldn't hear before. The gift of Alcoholics Anonymous that I've been given is a tremendous and wonderful life where I live. We're active. I have sponsees here. We've had the opportunity to travel back to Seattle and several places around the United States and the world. It's a wonderful life we have here. We're going to go to the Bash, and then we're going to go off to New Zealand and Australia next year, because it's kind of along the way there. This afternoon, I'm going to meet with a sponsee, and we're going to do some big book work. And all I get is right now. That's all I get is right here, right now. I believe in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe in the 12 and 12. I believe that I was driven here under the lash of alcoholism, and that I've been set free from most of those things. I understand my service work. I understand how Dr. Bob, and if you've been to Akron, you'll find this book. It's called The Greatest Thing in the World, and it's by Henry Drummond. And the greatest thing in the world is love. love. In closing, in a short point of time, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to share. I really appreciate you guys, and I love each and every one of you, even though I don't mind. In finishing, this says, I admire people who go way in, but I wish they would not forget how it was on the outside, but they before they got in. Then they would help. They would be able to help the people who have not yet found the door, or the people who want to run away from God. You can go in too deep and stay too long and forget the people on the outside of the door. As for me, I shall take my old accustomed place, near enough to God to hear him and know he's there, but not so far from the men as not to hear them. And remember, they are there too. Where? Outside the door. Thousands of them, millions of them, but more important for me, one of them, two of them, 10 of them, whose hands I intend to put on the latch. So I shall stand by the door and wait for those who seek. I'd rather be a doorkeeper, so I stand by the door. Thank you very much for having me.